So we're now going to be moving on to our next session before lunch, and we're focusing now on diversity in space. And we're going to be hearing from academics about how a diverse space workforce really is crucial to securing the best security outcomes. And we're going to be hearing from examples from a gender perspective and about the lived experience of women in the defence space industry. We'll take the temperature from the panel first before we go to lunch, and then when we come back from lunch, we'll have a Q&A. So you've got plenty of time to reflect on what you've heard from the panel. And I'd like to introduce that panel now. So please do, first of all, a welcome. Carissa Christensen, who's the Chief Executive Officer and founder of BryceTech. She previously co-founded defence contractor the Towery Group, which was acquired by LMI in 2019. And she is an internationally recognised expert on the satellite space industry and chairs international forums and is on many boards globally. So welcome, Carissa. Great to have you here on the panel. Also welcome Julia Balm, who's a PhD candidate at the Freeman Air and Space Institute here in London, the School of Security Studies at King's College. Her research focuses on space power theory in the new space age. A warm welcome, Julia. Great to have you with us. Also welcome Wing Commander Sas Duffin, who's a qualified space instructor and develops space training, education and awareness for defence. She's a UK Space Command Space Fellow, and her PhD research considers the contribution of national cultures and international behaviours in space, international relations, and how it really does affect alliances, norms and responsible behaviour. So welcome, Sas. Great to have you with us. And she's moved to NATO Space Centre as branch head of Enablement and deputy director. So we'll get perspectives from Sas on NATO as well. And welcome Melissa Quinn, who is the Managing Director of Seradata, Slingshot's Aerospace industry-leading space database, tracks every launch since Sputnik. So warm welcome, Melissa. And Melissa was previously Director of Spaceport Cornwall and was instrumental in the first launch, of course, from UK soil earlier this year, as we've heard about. And Melissa is part of Women in Aerospace and is a Fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society. So a great panel. Really excited to hear from you all. But first of all, Carissa is going to give us her thoughts because she's been taking the temperature right across the industry.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk about the diversification of space. We talk at every conference about how space capabilities are valuable for our national defense and for that of our allies. So if we think about space capabilities as assets, maybe we can think about those assets, like we do financial assets, as generally benefiting from a diversified portfolio. So diversification in finance helps reduce risk, improve returns. It stabilizes results. By owning multiple assets that perform differently, you reduce overall risk on your portfolio and you're safer. In the last decade, space capabilities and the ecosystem that creates and delivers them have become massively more diversified. And that's generally a good thing. And so from a global perspective, here are a few examples of what I mean. And I was going to say slide, DIY, okay. In the last decade, new investors have delivered more than $50 billion US to create more than 500 new space companies around the world. Bringing new founders into the space ecosystem and driving disruptive innovation across all space markets. About half of that investment went into launch companies. Combined with next generation vehicles in development by long-standing providers, the result is an unprecedented breadth of launch capability, dramatically lower launch prices, and a record-breaking number of orbital launches in 2023. We've already exceeded 200 this year. Globally. New satellite form factors are at the heart of many of these venture-funded startups, enabling incremental funding and growth. It's hard to start a company with $10 million if your satellite would cost $250 million. But if your architecture relies on hundreds of small sats, you can start to prove your concept with just a few relatively inexpensive satellites and expand from there. And that's really been enabling for venture funding in space. And of course, small sat constellations in LEO are delivering new imagery with global insight and short periods between images, allowing for change detection. Large and even massive constellations like Starlink, OneWeb, and Kuiper are planning for ubiquitous global broadband with low latency, augmenting existing geosatellites to provide a more robust, resilient future suite of commercial capabilities, and also, of course, flowing into national security architectures as well. We're seeing government acquisitions taking advantage of new products and services offered by these and other companies to do things like extend satellite life, support resilient LEO architectures, and manage debris. And finally, we're seeing a transformed on-orbit population, with now, in 2023, close to 10,000 active satellites where there used to be 1,000, delivering these new capabilities to users globally, along with some potential challenges that go with growth, notably debris threats and issues for science. Overall, the space ecosystem has diversified significantly in the last decade, and so new investors, new firms, new architectures, new systems. The benefits from that include enhanced manufacturing, rapid innovation, the ability to achieve greater space effects than a decade ago, and that diversification has generally reduced costs and increased our resiliency. I do want to take a moment to say at a national level, from a national perspective, we face a policy imperative to take action to preserve the most important elements of that diversified ecosystem to ensure we can meet future national security objectives. Aspects of that ecosystem, those commercial companies and providers that I talked about, are under threat due to factors like less available investment capital and insufficient non-government demand for some relevant products and services. So that's a topic that I hope we have an opportunity to talk about a little bit more. The driver of every aspect of our space portfolio is, of course, our workforce. So how are we doing on diversification of our workforce? We're seeing an increasing diversity of skills in the space workforce, given the increased number of space firms and their various business areas, new commercial applications, and investor attention and media coverage. Space jobs encompass a wide range of skill sets. It's hard to think of a discipline that doesn't have some potential relevance. My company has a space artist on staff, for example. Looking, though, at what the main jobs that we're hiring for are, we did an evaluation last year. We assessed the job postings of about 60 representative US companies. These are the most common job postings from most to least. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, the top position being recruited for was aerospace engineer, but overall, the top category of jobs was computing and information technology related. The hardest jobs to fill, by the way, based on time to fill, were skilled technical positions not requiring a university degree. Those took longest to fill. So a workforce area where the industry still has challenges is gender and race diversity. There are no reliable, comprehensive statistics on diversity across the space ecosystem. I'm showing here some data from the US Defense Department, highlighting the Air Force, and which is indicative of, it's not a full picture of the broader industry. The general view, in my experience, is that government and private sector organizations have improved diversity in the last decade, and that nevertheless, women and minorities remain underrepresented, especially in technical and leadership roles. So what's the path to getting closer to full representation? As you will have gathered from the slides that I presented in the topics I'm discussing, I'm not a diversity expert. And so in order to bring some meaningful insight to this group, what I did was I reached out and I talked to a dozen senior leaders. These are people who have run the largest space agencies, served as general officers, headed major defense firms, led key industry associations, and held eminent positions at very elite universities and think tanks. And I talked to a dozen people who happened to be women and minorities. 10 were women, half were Black or people of color. And I asked them this question. So based on your experience as a leader and as a member of an underrepresented community, what practical thing do you think we should be doing? What one thing do you think might help, small or large? And they talked about 3 general topics, and I'll sort of tell their stories to you. So one, they talked about career on-ramps, advice, day-to-day advice to managers, and leadership. So several people talked about getting young professionals into the industry through internship programs, especially when they're connected to other programs that provide next steps. One respondent who's now on the faculty of a world-class university talked about NASA fellowships and internships, some of which no longer exist, that provided her with what she called a no-gap path forward. So she came in as an intern and then had next steps available to go forward. She said the first internship at a NASA field center is why she switched her major to aerospace engineering. Another mentioned outreach to historically Black colleges and universities. And people talked about not just raising awareness, but creating a sense of welcome, making it clear that the industry had a place for people. Several mentioned the Brooke Owens Fellowship Program, which is uses an in-depth process to select highly qualified women university students. It places them in summer aerospace jobs. It provides them with mentors, and it connects them with their cohort of fellows as well as the fellows that have gone before. The advantages of that program that one of the people I talked to pointed out, she said, look, it demystifies access to leaders because leaders are in there acting as mentors and giving talks to the fellows. It provides, I thought this was really interesting, her perspective on this. She said, it provides a cadre of peers that helps these young women combat imposter syndrome. That was an interesting take. It hits as these young professionals are entering the workforce to create that sense of welcome and do, at least in part, that innovative selection process. They're perceived, these young fellows, as perceived as high performers and have become a very desirable pool for companies to recruit from. As I said, the program is oversubscribed with companies that want to participate. So in addition to those career on-ramps, people talked about day-to-day operations and management, and quite a few talked about getting rid of things that do not work. They mentioned, of course, tokenism, hire one person and sort of check the box and move on. Several talked about the mistake of putting the wrong person in the wrong job for the sake of diversity. Somebody who does not have the appropriate skills, somebody is too junior. They emphasize that as something that just does not work. One person said she'd seen diversity awareness video training that not only wasn't effective, she said it just made people mad. She didn't care for it at all. They talked about creating an environment where it was safe for women to be unlikable or say hard things, and about the importance of vocal allies. One said when a woman is maybe given less time to speak, or perhaps her input isn't fully considered, it's powerful when a man points it out and objects, because that makes the point that this is a workplace issue that affects everyone. I think most consistently, the leaders I spoke to talk about leadership. They talked about representation at the most senior levels and how important that is. And they talked about the importance of a commitment and a belief in the power of diverse organizations by organizational leaders. Many commented that representation is poorer at senior levels, and they emphasized the need for women and minorities to hold senior positions, particularly in technical career tracks. One woman said when she became when a woman became the CEO of the Fortune 500 defense prime she worked at, she decided not to leave as she had been planning and stayed, and her career trajectory actually achieved a very high level. She talked about the value of celebrating and highlighting diverse leaders so people can see themselves. Another woman who herself was the former CEO of an iconic aerospace manufacturer commented that to get her first management role on an engineering project, she had to fight her way in. She said, they didn't want me, but I knew I could do the job. And other people talked about that as well. I thought this was very interesting. Board roles came up, and one person said, if boards simply adhered to good governance processes, by rotating board members every 6 years. That would create new opportunities for new board members, including women and minorities. She sat on a number of boards, and she said board members are motivated to kind of keep those jobs, and companies don't enforce those good governance practices. And I want to close with a story about leadership. When I heard this, I said, oh, I want to share that, but of course I won't attribute it. And the person telling me the story said, not only can you share it, but you can absolutely say it came from me. So this leader was involved in a study for the Commandant of the US Marine Corps to understand why of 587 jet pilots, 3 were Black. And that number was lower than it had been years before. The study included interviews with organizational leaders. The person I was talking to said, we talked to every 3-star that was available. And the ones that weren't Black or female said, we don't have a problem. The Marine Corps is a performance organization. And if we divert our attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're going to lose the next war. And so the person I was speaking with and his team conducting the study felt that that attitude had contributed to the decline of representation in the organization. They felt the most senior leaders in the organization really need to believe in the value of diversity. They really need to believe that seeking talent from the whole population will improve performance. They need to believe in the benefits of diversity of thought, culture, and experience. And if they don't have that belief, it was their view, that organization will miss out on brilliant contributors to success. So, and the person telling me this story added a personal note. He said, that he felt the attitude of these Marine Corps generals dismissed his own accomplishments and contributions. He said, I never thought thinking about people like me would be a diversion. And I want to tell you who that person was, who felt that his peers through that perspective did not value what he had done. That was Major General Charles F. Bolden, US Marine, aviator and test pilot, NASA astronaut with 4 trips to space, pilot of 2 shuttle missions, commander of STS-45 and 60, and of course, administrator of NASA from 2009 to 2017. That's the person who felt his accomplishments weren't valued because leaders didn't see the importance of diversity. And that's the talent, that's the kind of talent that I think is at risk. So with that, I'll close, and I very much look forward to our panel discussion and Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Carissa, great to hear from you, not just your own thoughts, but certainly those perspectives across the industry, and what a powerful story to end on. I want to bring in Julia straight away because you've conducted quite a lot of research into this. And what has it thrown up about just why a diverse space workforce is just so critical?
Sure. So as an academic, I suppose I'll start with definitions. So diversity at its core is really about people who are underrepresented. And it's about making sure that we are more inclusive, but why? And research shows time and time again that we're making better decisions, we are more agile, we are more cohesive if we do include more diversity. So with an academic hat on, my argument will be there's more impact if we have more diversity. So from a research perspective, regardless of which field that you're researching, in the academic pipeline, in the education process, you have to consider the role between impact and diversity. So impact being the provable benefit of research in the real world, and benefit, I suppose, could be debated, but the point is that this is assessing meaningfulness and sort of output and solutions that are tangible. And we have to consider how diversity fits in here because, like military in its most ideal form, academics and researchers should be representative of the population of which they serve, but also of which that they're studying. So being an academic and looking for impact statistics or evidence of impact, it's kind of like detective work, going in, looking for stats, looking for data, and then cohering that into singularity. Making sure that the data that you're researching is representative of the population writ large, but also you and your team are diverse, not only in sort of age, gender, sexuality, race, etc., but are considering your own diverse backgrounds, your personal experiences in that which you are researching. So in academia and in universities, there's sort of this movement about being interdisciplinary by design, which is a great step towards that. And that's applying for grants not only across your department and looking for those that are diverse, but looking for grants across different departments. So for more studies applying for grants with an engineer, or a roboticist applying for a grant with an ethicist, or co-authorship between humanities and astrophysics. Because so often in universities, single authorship is the mark for career promotion or advancement, or sort of taking another step up in your career. But actually, if you are able to do co-authorship and to integrate multiple views and multiple disciplines and be diverse in your approach, your impact is far greater. So from the research that it shows time and time again, if you are more diverse and you're able to bring back your different backgrounds and different researchers together to provide that level of engagement with the space sector, with any field really, because if we're talking about an education process in university, it's not just war studies, it's not just astrophysics, it's not just a single degree, it's also soft skills, but we can get into that. We need to use our diverse strengths to gain that impact. And if I can just make another point specific to the space sector, we throw around the term space-mindedness quite a bit, but what does space-mindedness look like? What do we want in a space-minded cohort? And so space-mindedness is really just about being innovative and having creative solutions at hand and being able to achieve that innovation. What is the cohort that we want to be able to unlock that? And that is fundamentally space-mindedness. That's taking advantage of our assets, that's divergent thinking, that's being able to ask questions regardless of how naive they may sound in a setting that maybe is not your own expertise, and then sharing those ideas to come to a better conclusion. So yeah, I could go on and on, but I'd rather pass the torch. But just the point would be, we have to bring these perspectives together in universities and research, and to gain impact if we are going to achieve that space-minded cohort that we really do need for the new space age and the next space age.
Okay, thank you very much, Julia. Let me bring in Melissa. I mean, you heard that diversity of opinion from Carissa, the frustrations, as well as the opportunities and the benefits of certain approaches. What's your take from your own career about some of the best approaches, and also just why diversity of thought in particular is so crucial to progress the industry?
Yeah, well, thank you first. And yeah, exactly what Carissa was saying. And many of you in this room probably know that I'm quite passionate about this, and I'm quite vocal about this because of my own experiences. But I think going back to one of the points that was on that list at the end of Chris's talk there was about leadership. And so it's one thing that we're in the industry, I think we're around the 20-24% mark of women in the industry. That hasn't shifted too much in the last few decades. But then when you go into the leadership level, into the C-suite level, and it's less than half of that. So there's a big gap there. And for me, it's really important because I go to a lot of these conferences, and I have been since I started this industry now about 12 years ago. And a lot of the same challenges are still there. And a lot of the same topics come up, and we talk about the same things over and over again. And that's because we're not bringing different people to the table with their different ideas and their different approaches of how we can maybe solve some of these problems. So diversity is key. We've got to start to have some of these different people having a seat at the table, making these decisions, having a seat at the table, but then using a voice at that table is really crucially important. And I think another point is really interesting is that female-led startups, for instance. So we talked earlier on Doug's panel about government contracts, and a lot of them going to primes. And then if you think about the primes, a lot of the leadership level, is a certain look and feel. And then a lot of the supply chain elements, a lot of the SMEs, that they might get a smaller piece of that pie. The SMEs themselves, there's a smaller level of female-led businesses. And there's a stat that came out from the OECD that government contracts globally in the space industry, only 1% go to a female-led business. So if you're a woman leading a business and wanting to do startup in this sector, I mean, that's a pretty big disadvantage to even start with in the first place. And then another thing I'm massively passionate about is having a high profile in this industry. And coming from a diverse background is fantastic because if you do get a platform like this to have a voice, then that's great, because another issue we have in this industry is communicating why space is powerful. And if I get to tell my community that, and somebody from a different background gets to tell their community, that spreads faster and wider, fantastic, that's great. But you do get put a bit in a spotlight. And my experience through launch was pretty pretty special when it came to the media exposure that I had and the pitfalls and the downfalls of being somebody that doesn't look like a director for Spaceport would, for instance, and the amount of abuse that I had to take because of just that alone. And you get this with female politicians and female leaders in other industries as well. This panel got it. When it was posted that we were speaking on this panel at this conference, it showed a picture of our faces. And if any of you saw it, the tweets, the abuse that we got as individuals was disgusting. That is normal. That is what you get online from being from a different background. So I think acknowledging that that's happening is really key, because I go out there and I tell girls, my 2 daughters included, that you can be whatever you want to be, and you can be in the space industry, and you can be a CEO in the space industry. But we have to be very aware that they will be facing challenges, and maybe we can talk through how we might.
And what should people in the room, people listening wider, what could they do actually to help support those women and other minorities going through the challenges that you've experienced? Call it out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really hard when you're a woman or somebody from a diverse background, a person of color, to defend yourself online without getting more abuse. And it will take the status quo, the white men in this room, to stand up and be like, no, hey, that's not okay. And I am so lucky that I've had incredible, male supporters over the years that have really championed me and have stood up for me. But you do need that. We still need that. We need that allyship. And Chris mentioned that earlier. Is so important. Is so crucial. And it's so important for women and, for us to stay together within this as well. So that's definitely always going to be my call out. Is I don't think a single person stepped into that conversation that was going on in a very public way about the women sat on this panel. And that's disappointing.
Okay, Melissa, thank you. More from you in a moment. I'm just going to pass over to Seth now, and I'd really like to get your view on this, especially with your NATO hat on, just how crucial is diversity of thought, diversity of background in decision-making?
I'll give you a fairly traditional defence answer, bottom line up front. Very short answer. To expand on that, in preparation for this conference, I'm ashamed to say, thoroughly read through the defence diversity strategy for the first time. And I was really taken by a phrasing that they used where they refer to harnessing the power of diversity. And that for me was a real recognition of how much other, whatever that might be, can contribute broadly. I think in defence, we have the potential, if we're not careful, to be probably slightly blinkered towards visible diversity. And while I'm not saying that that's not important, I think more diverse perspectives from different backgrounds, different life experience, etc., can only help in developing, for me, the space domain. When I first started in space, I was told by a senior officer at the time, I was like, I feel like a bit of a fraud. I've come across I've had a slightly random space career. I came across after 13 years of being a personnel officer, stumbled into space, got absolutely bitten by it, and I was like, that's what I want to do. And then had the inevitable sort of imposter syndrome surrounding that. And this senior officer said, I don't see space domain or space power as being any different than air was in 1918. We didn't have a whole load of SQEP. We didn't have a whole load of people that knew what we wanted to do with air power at the time, just knew that it was something that we needed to get involved in. And from his perspective, he was like, I will take anybody that has an interest in it. I don't care where they've come from, what they are. And that has kind of stuck with me throughout. At the beginning of this conference, AVM Godfrey spoke about the rapidly changing defence context, the speed at which space itself is developing, and the need to avoid groupthink. And therefore, for me, I think that having that diversity of thought, having people who look to problem solving with a different perspective can only be a benefit to us. Again, in that first panel, Juliana looked out threat scanning sort of 10 years plus. If we have groupthink, we are in danger of responding the same way to the same things. And I think the more that we can do to make sure that we are bringing different perspective into the rooms where we're looking at what threats are and how we might counter that, again, can only be a good thing for defence. in the course of my space career, in sort of the last 6 years or so, when I started, there was no Space Command, wasn't even a twinkle in people's eye. It was a Space and BM force, and it was very RAF-centric. Nothing wrong with that, because that started the foundations of how it moved on. But that evolution, when it became Space Command and it became joint, and then all of a sudden you have perspectives from, I'm Air Force, my background up until now had been very heavily Air Force. But it meant that I was sat in the same rooms as Navy, land, and civil service perspective, and really thinking differently. Like I hadn't considered that before. So for me, it became very a personal way of developing that. And then I've moved on again now to NATO Space Center. And if you want diversity, you take 4 other domains and 31 nations, and you have got a lot of different people with a lot of different opinions about how you can do one thing in the space domain. But I think it is brilliant for that, because again, I have a Spanish fast jet pilot who looks at my policy and planning and brings a very different perspective than if it had been left to myself to look at. So that the nature, but then when we look at, the representative diversity, we're a very small team over in NATO space, but in that small team, we've got a pretty good balance. We're probably running at about 25 to 30% female representation, which would be something that the Air Force in general would strive for, definitely. But then when you take out that small pocket of people and you look around the entirety of the headquarters that's there, my rank as an SO1 as a wing commander is the highest that a female goes to. But a lot of that is because where NATO, as with anything that it does, is reliant on what the nations contribute towards it. So if those nations don't have a particularly diverse background within their own makeup, then you're going to reduce the amount of diversity that you see across in NATO. So yeah, I think for me, it goes back to that, the bluntness of diversity is very important, because of the fact that if you have a room full of, they might even look quite similar, but if you've got a room full of very different backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences, then you have a different approach to problem solving, you have a different approach to development, and you have a different approach to understanding the threat and how you counter that, which ultimately is what defence is all about.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Carissa, going back to you, having gone through that kind of study of international and cross-industry perspectives on diversity, has it made you think your own policies within your own company and think about the action that still needs to be taken, not just within your own firm, but also wider across the industry?
So I've always felt that I've run several companies. I am a founder, dispositioned a couple companies. I've always felt that the path to success was hiring the best person for the job. And, I'm an analyst. I've got a very efficiency mindset. The idea of not recruiting the best person for the job from over half the population just seems fundamentally inefficient and flawed. So that's always been part of our goal, is to reach broadly and then hire the best person for the job. With regard to diversity of perspective, my company blends assessment of technology portfolio management, forecasting, so relatively deep engineering and technical backgrounds with economics, with market forecasting, with trend analysis, with policy. And so that blending of diverse perspectives really has been defining for the businesses that I've run and the services that we provide to government agencies around the world, as well as commercial clients. So I think that I'm, my view on the value of interdisciplinary perspectives continues to remain strong. I as I said, I'm not an expert on the right policy, the mechanics of doing this well. And what I, as a company leader, can do is different from what a government agency can do. There are different rules of the road. There are different objectives and standards. So I think that a really important part of the answer is there's no one policy, there's no one pathway that is going to work for every organization and in every circumstance. And I really was so struck by what Charlie Bolden said, and I'm so grateful that he was willing to share that with us, that belief in the value of an organization with different perspectives, different thoughts, different backgrounds, that drives positive outcomes, that's really the linking principle across all of those different mechanisms and approaches that different organizations might use.
Okay, Carissa, thank you. Melissa, what initiatives would you like to see more companies employ, the sector as a whole really employ to try and move the dial here and prevent more women and people from diverse backgrounds actually getting the same type of flat that you got?
Still get. I think for me, it's not just one thing. I think I like to call it my toolkit. So I mentioned earlier, like I love to go in and speak to young people. I've been into about 150 different schools, and I feel like it's our personal responsibility to be honest about what it is like in the industry. And I can sit there and say, you can be whatever you want, but here are some of the challenges you're going to face, because it's quite shocking when you do face them and you don't know what to do. You don't know where to turn. You don't know what's okay and what's not. And I think a lot of people from diverse backgrounds might be able to kind of, we heard the story. So telling our stories, and not from feel bad for me, pity me, because actually the stuff that has happened to me in my journey in this industry, some really awful, awful things has happened to me just because I'm a female. But for me, it's made me more resilient. It's made me really determined to be the leader that I am, and it's developed me into the leader that I am. But I'm so lucky because I am privileged. I'm white. I'm educated. I'm from a safe country. I have a great family around me. So I've come from a great starting point. And so I do fear that if we're not careful, that even the truthful hurdles and challenges that anybody from my diverse background is going to face, the attainment of them once they're in the industry is so important. So I guess that toolkit for me, and when I'm talking about this more widely, it's recognizing that, whether it's in your HR processes and ensuring that you've got the right ones that fit the people that you have at the minute, but also that you want to attract next. And then we talked about mentorships and allyship is crucially important within your industries. And even my early days, Carissa was one of the first person I met in the space industry. And I was just like, wow, she's incredible at what she's achieved. And she didn't take any, proverbial. And that was great for a young woman in the space industry to realize, oh no, I don't need to be spoken to like that. That's not okay. So that kind of whistleblowing, where do I go when I get shouted at on the street with my children there telling me how I've done an awful job and how I almost killed a bunch of people? What do I do with that? And unless you're supported, and I think a lot of people think I left Spaceport because unfortunately our satellites didn't get to where they needed to go, but it wasn't that. There's only so much that you can take and not have an employer that's supporting you. So from an attraction, but then also an attainment point of view, you want to create and hone these incredible individuals and talent, and then not lose them as well. So for me, it's creating a toolkit for whatever fits the business to attract, but set up the processes so that if something is going sideways, that there's a route into that, and they don't feel like their job's at risk if they start to call stuff out.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. Well, let me bring back in Julia. What has your research thrown up about the initiatives that really could move the dial here?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with what Carissa said about top-down changes that have to happen, and on a board structure, absolutely. But I think that it would be a mistake to be doing all of this top-down, and so much of this has to happen bottom-up as well, and making sure that we have the education process to support it. We can't have a conversation like Melissa brought up about talent retention without talking about diversity and inclusion. And so funnily enough, on this stage alone, you've got 3 UK visa holders. We have to talk about graduate visas. We have to talk about the skills and the education that we are training in our universities here, and talking about the space sector being strong, but how do we keep them? And how do we make sure that that has a longer term vision in mind? Because Juliana also brought up that we tend to have this sort of shorter term or shorter timeline for especially democracies, but how do we make sure that our planning and our strategies can be longer term? How do we keep talent? And barriers to entry are not going to help support the sector being strong. So it's quite hard to legislate diversity, and I think so much of it is just about making sure that our minds are open, and that at every opportunity we are trying to be more inclusive. But it is about decreasing those barriers to entry, making sure that from the bottom up, and tasking those at the top to consider the needs from the communities and those at the bottom, what do they need? And to also ask them and offer that support, because it has to be sustainable. Otherwise, changes that are made are futile, to put it quite bluntly.
Thank you. And Sas, just to close before lunch, we talk a lot, don't we? But what actions do you think could be taken in the future that actually would have made a difference to your own career in military space and those women who've gone along the journey with you?
So I think for me, because I haven't had a standard traditional career by any stretch of the imagination, but before starting to talk about things that we could begin to do, I think it's worth noting that certainly from the defence perspective or the Air Force perspective, for me, there's a few things that were done that they should absolutely continue to do, because it got me onto this stage here today. So as far as I'm concerned, it worked. So I was given the chance when I first looked. I had a little bit of a mid-career crisis. I was telling somebody earlier, I spent several months walking around with 3 COAs in the back of my book, pros and cons, and I had no timeline. It was my own timeline. And I just was talking to people and fell into space by accident because of another job that I was doing, got talking to a few people within space, and I was like, this has really, really bitten me. And I was incredibly fortunate that at the time, there were 3 people in 3 very key positions who were like, she's gone out, she's got herself some space training and education, so she's motivated. And actually, we're at a point where we need to look at how we're going to develop space and defense for the next sort of 10 years, and we need some different thinking. So it was not we need some more women on board, it was we need some fresh thinking. And she's already proven that she's keen, etc. So having that ability to be open to bringing in something that is other to you, I think is really important. And I would want to see defence broadly continue to do things like that, particularly now that we've got a joint space command that has to be echoed across the other services. I think that the ability to cross trade and branch, as I did, the Air Force management will probably not be too keen on me saying this, but I think the value and the perspective that brings when you allow people to take the knowledge that they've already developed over a career and take it into somewhere else, and you naturally go in with more questions. So having processes that allow that to happen, instead of saying, no, this is what you joined as, this is what you must stay as, I think is really refreshing, and again, something that needs to be maintained. I would like to see the opportunity, and I know that there are some people that agree with this and some people that will not, but I would really like to see the opportunity in the years to come for service personnel such as myself to be able to forge a career in space and just do space. I understand that it needs to be broadened, because otherwise I've just shot all of my other arguments out of the water. You need to have some diversity to it, but for this to grow, whether that's for UK space broadly, across defence and industry, you need to be able to have some level of concentrated depth of experience and knowledge and training. So I would like to see that developed in the years to come. It is a slightly cliched, probably overused phraseology, but you have to see it to be it. And there are while I think space does better than a lot of some areas in defence for having female representation, that's what I am, that's what I'm interested in. it had, up to a point, there was no opportunity for anything beyond sort of OF5. Now that opportunity, although we don't have any female starred officers who have a space background and experience now, what we have developed with the opening of Space Command is the opportunity to get to 2-star. So you can at least now see something that you can aspire to. So that has increased the ability for people to have a progressive career within space, within defense, and I think that's super important. And I think just the last point that I would make, I started my career in defense knowing that I would walk into a room, and if I was lucky, I was going to be 20%, more often than not 15, 10, maybe even less than that. That is improving. It's slow moving, but it's improving. But I do think that space broadly is in a slightly better perspective than defense is. And I would want to see that continue, because I think it brings the best for everybody.
Okay, well, thank you so much to Sass, and Melissa, to Julia and Carissa. And we are going to be coming back to take your questions. They're coming through thick and fast. There's some really great questions. So do have a think over lunch. Do post some more through Slido, and you can put your hand up when we come back as well, because we've got another discussion to have, 30 minutes. Will we get through it all? We'll have to see. But thanks very much for engagement so far, and a warm thanks to the panel. So welcome back. I'm pleased to say we're going to renew our discussions on diversity in space. So let me welcome back the panel, Carissa Christensen, CEO and founder of BryceTech. Also welcome back Julia Balm, PhD candidate at the Freeman Air and Space Institute. Wing Commander Sass Duffin, who's a qualified space instructor and is currently working at the NATO Space Centre. And Melissa Quinn, the Managing Director of Seradata. So welcome back. Do come and take a seat. So we have lots of questions which have come through via Slido, but we're also keen to take questions from the floor. The question that has actually had the most likes, so I'm going to put it to the panel first, is that a number of attendees stepped out prior to this panel. Should we be worried about our priorities? 2 attendees used the panel as an opportunity to hold a sidebar chat in the audience. I didn't actually see that, but I'd like to get your reflections on whether we can make meaningful progress when our community acts like this. Carissa, do you want to go first?
Well, this is going to require me to make a confession, which is I am notorious for having approximately a 20-minute attention span at conferences, at which point I get antsy and I need to go have a sidebar or leave or... So I am going to assume that the people who left the panel were leaving for good reasons. And I'll tell another story on myself. When I was in graduate school, I and a person who went on to become a flag officer in the US Air Force were scolded for being a bit disruptive in class by a person who went on to become the US Secretary of Defense. So I also cannot be super critical of people occasionally having to have sidebars. And I say these things because the tone of that comment, I think the intent is admirable. I think the tone is a little adversarial. And this is not an adversarial topic. We are all trying to get to the same goal, which is high-performing organizations achieving mission goals, protecting our national security. And so that's our shared goal. This topic is one topic to grapple with to move toward that goal. And so I think that taking the frame of reference that says we all have a shared goal, we all are trying to solve the same problems, some in different ways, is a more productive approach to the conversation. And it gives us more agency than to say, oh, those people who are having a sidebar, we're doing it because they don't care about diversity. The people that left because they don't care about diversity. I think that's really unlikely. So that would be my take on that.
But how important is really listening and listening to experiences, Melissa?
Yeah, and I think, as I said earlier, I think hearing some of the experience is really important. I think I've had about 10 people come up to me just in the break and say, I had no idea stuff like this was going on. Just even mentioning one tweet that was so negative, and I was like, that is literally just the tip of the iceberg. But in a way, it's up to us to also tell our stories, and definitely not in a way to like, you know, accuse people or to say, you know, everybody's bad if they're not, you know, helping us out. But it's just to raise awareness that, look, we face, you know, different challenges as individuals, but then some of us face a little bit more, and we can use that. And I'm using it, and I've become more resilient. And like I said, you know, I've got a bit more grit to me now. I've got thicker skin, and that's made me become a better leader. But it's also made me more aware of what some of my team might be facing as well. And so I think by listening, you can maybe understand, listen to our stories, go, oh, wait, I have, you know, somebody on my team that has seemed a little bit off, and maybe they are, you know, something has happened. Or when somebody comes to you and they're like, look, you know, it's great that you put me up for, you know, that award or that panel, but, you know, I had a weird comment online, and you might go, oh, actually, yeah, I need to do something about it. So I think for me, it's just raising awareness, so that we can achieve those goals that we all want to achieve. And one of the things I really struggled with is not having that support when I turn and say, hey, look, like I can handle a lot now, but sometimes it does go over the line, and I do need to talk to somebody about it. Where do I turn, and who will listen, and who won't just say, oh gosh, if you're going to put yourself in the media, you better get used to it. Like, so for me, it's just that awareness, and by listening to what we have to say, and share some of our stories. And I'm sure many of you of all different backgrounds in this audience have a unique story to tell, and I think it's important that we share them.
Are you concerned, though, that stories like yours might put off people from joining the sector?
I haven't told my stories on purpose for a lot of those reasons. I did actually, that when I left Spaceport and I was allowed to kind of speak more openly, I did a speaking slot and at an event, and I told some of the more scary stories. And actually, no, it did the opposite. I had a lot of it was women. They came up to me and they was like, "Oh, that was really empowering of how you handled it and the support network you put around you, and it's given me that, you know, that toolkit to see what I might need to do in that." But I do think that facing, you know, even the comments that we've had, facing some of the stuff that I've had, if I didn't have that support network, if I didn't have the confidence in myself, you know, then yes, 100% it would put people off if you even had a glimmer of some of the negativity that some of us have faced.
Well, let me move on to another popular question. Looking at the people in the room, it feels like we have a very long way to go. The last panel was all men. What can we do to significantly accelerate progress? Sass, do you have a view on that?
Well, this panel is all female, so it's I think going back to the unfortunate social media incident that Melissa was talking about when this panel was advertised on social media, and there was an awful one, but there was also one which, to be honest, had a valid point, because it was like, where is the diversity in this? Because again, people look for and reach for those visible diversities, and there was one gentleman who'd put, where are all the Pakistani men on this panel? And then somebody else had gone back with a return over, well, I'm assuming that most of them are probably in Pakistan. But it was just like trying to make light of it. But then it was, you have that. So I would have had a similar reaction if I was looking at a diversity panel and it was all white male. I would have been like, oh, they probably could have worked a bit harder, because I am as guilty of looking at, you have the face value of what does diversity look like, and it's always what it looks like as opposed to what it is. And I think, you know, we, the four of us, the five of us on this platform now, have very different backgrounds and very different experiences. And I will continue to kind of put that focus on, that's where the diversity needs to be. I do think it needs to be better visibly represented, absolutely. But I think the more effort that is put into making sure that you have some form of diversity, which allows people to see that the door is open to them, for them to walk through if they choose to, can only be a good thing.
And picking up on that point, there's another question that came through. This is titled as Diversity in Space, yet all we've spoken about is women diversity and not even diverse women. Will space diversity be covered? Carissa, I mean, you did actually talk quite a lot about wider diversity in your opening speech.
Yeah, so speaking specifically to the topic of the views of people of color, The dozen people that I spoke to and shared their thoughts, half of them were people of color. So I think that the topic has come up. Have we covered the topic in sufficient depth? That's a reasonable question. A couple of people I spoke with commented that while there has been some level of measurable progress in terms of representation of women in technical arenas, particularly engineering degrees, and in certain kinds of leadership roles, that the progress of minorities, racial minorities, has been much slower, and even in some instances seen some erosion. So, there's certainly different topics and worth talking about. So that's what I can offer.
Okay, we're talking about different topics. I know there was a question from the floor. Do we have the microphones available? Yes. Paul Sanger-Davies, I know you wanted to ask a question about wider diversity.
Thanks, Susanna. The question, I think, was mentioned, sorry, the answer was mentioned by SAS specifically, but what about the power of neurodiversity? I think about 40% of people in military uniform in the UK have got some place on the spectrum, especially the Director of Defence Studies, who's a penchant for wearing red trousers. I think the only one in the audience. But if you watch Ender's Game, that's the way to win future war. Over.
Thank you very much, Paul. Julia, do you have a perspective on that? The importance of really optimizing neurodiversity within the sector.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a whole host of things that are not visible. Like Sass mentioned, we're talking about what's visible, but there are so many things that constitute diversity that are not necessarily put on a CV or, worn out frontally. So I think when we're talking about diversity, we have to be cognizant that there are things that we're not seeing represented on someone's skin or gender or background. So these soft skills also, and everything that makes you good at your job or be able to bring a different perspective to the job is critical and is important. Neurodiversity is absolutely a part of that, and as is cognitive diversity. There are so many things that are hard to measure. There's not enough research done about cognitive diversity or neurodiversity at all, and there has to be more done on that, but it's sort of like, research on the impact of people who are able to read music, for example. There's a lot done on that where you can sort of measure those who are able to read polyphonic music. The hemispheres in the brain are able to synthesize better. There's a stat in an academic paper where those who have experience in orchestras or can read music or have experience with music are 10% quicker in decision-making on average. And these types of skills are incredibly difficult to put on a CV and say, oh, this is something that's really important. And so that's neurodiversity, that's cognitive diversity, that's the whole skill set and backgrounds that we're trying to bring to the conversation, as well as that which we actually do see represented. It's also, empathy, that's leadership, that's teamwork. We talk about those skills, but it's also, what kind of hobbies do you have? What's your background? What is inside of you that you're bringing to the table? And we have to consider that as well. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much. And actually that ties into a point that Jenny, who's posed a question, has made when talking about diversity and inclusion, has shown the tendency is to talk about either race or gender. In what other ways can we bring increasing diversity into the sector? Melissa, do you have a view on that, of making sure that really the sector's reach is much wider and you're able to access bigger pools of talent?
Yeah, I think it comes back to, from my experience, it's going into the schools where we are in Cornwall. It's one of the poorest parts of Europe. We have some really hard-hit, economically deprived areas, kids from many different backgrounds down there, and almost prioritizing going into those schools. And for us, it's, taking, when we had the Virgin Orbit team over from, again, very diverse backgrounds from California, we got them out into the schools because we needed to show them that what a rocket engineer looked like, and it wasn't probably what they had in their head. And, that seeing, believing that we were talking about earlier. And so getting, as many people out there who have different jobs that look different than the stereotypes, but also that have jobs that a lot of young people don't ever think are space jobs. And I think that's really important for us. And I think I said earlier, having those different communities come and be part of this industry, they then go and tell their communities about what the space industry is doing and how it can benefit humanity as a whole, I think is really important. the SDGs and how space can empower education and raise up lots of different diverse backgrounds as well. So space has this ability to, not just from inside the industry with the workforce, but actually using the technology to go and to communicate what's going on in the wider world to help to raise that up as well and to highlight some of these. And I'll just end on it's quite interesting working with Sir Richard, and I think Sandy's in the room somewhere, but he's publicly very proud of being dyslexic, and how he's going back to what we were talking about a second ago, and how we can optimize for the workforce now. It's like, oh, actually dyslexic people can do this really brilliantly, so let's optimize our workplaces for them and working environments for them so they can go and smash it for us. So it was great to see how Virgin Group was developing from that point of view. It was great for my leadership going forward.
Thank you. Carissa?
So very practically, space is losing the competition for certain kinds of critical skill sets. Students, young people getting degrees with an AI focus, computer engineering, coding, cyber skills. These are highly competitive fields that are driving space capabilities, driving space companies. And space is challenged. Government salaries are not competitive with private sector salaries. Contractor salaries are not government contractor salaries focused on space are not always competitive with the private sector. So the awareness that Melissa is talking about, the communicating about space opportunities, is highly relevant, not just for a long-term investment in a more diverse workforce, but to meet some near-term skills challenges. And we do have an advantage. And that is, and you all know it, it's true, space is cool. And that it's motivating, it's engaging, it's exciting. So, that idea of welcoming and bringing people in terms of diversity, it is absolutely a workforce diversity question too. It's absolutely a skill set, jobs, and training question. And so very pragmatically, in the very short term, we need to be thinking about programs to expose that pipeline of students to space as a career pathway and try to engage them with the subject matter, because we're not going to win when we fight when we fight the battle with money.
Yeah, and Carissa, that draws on another point made on a previous panel, that actually there's a real shortage of non-graduate technical positions. And this ties into another question that's come through. Is the industry too graduate focused? What is the appetite of the space industry to properly invest in apprenticeships to make space more accessible to more people? Do you think there is enough done in the apprenticeship sphere? What more should be done?
So as I showed the data, we those jobs take a very long time to fill. That's indicative of a shortage. There are multiple programs that we can point to looking at creating technical training on a path other than university. Are they enough? No, because there's still a shortage. But I don't think it's something the industry has completely ignored or is unaware of. I think there's certainly been progress made there.
Okay, and Sass, let me bring you in here. You were talking earlier about how you really wanted to see, an opportunity to join the Space Force. Space is cool, as what Carissa's just been saying. Do you think that actually really would help with recruitment?
I think it would. There are caveats to that, obviously, because we have a finite amount of money, we have a finite amount of workforce resource, and we're all fighting for that same money and workforce. So it requires a conscious sort of decision to make sure that defence is really focusing on space. And obviously the stand-up of Space Command a couple of years ago has gone a long way towards doing that. But now we're probably at that point where we need to think of next steps. And then it becomes about longevity and ensuring that we do it to the best way possible. So have we got the right people working for us? Have we got the right blend? And right people, I think we spoke about this earlier today, but right people in the right jobs. Because there are some people that would sail through certain very technical jobs, but maybe are not people that you would choose for day-to-day engagement, contract management, that sort of thing. And so I think, but to do that, you need to know your workforce. And to know your workforce, you need to understand the skill set that you've got with you. which is where I think you really need to be looking at, open that door to as many people as possible, look at what they're bringing in, look at where you want to go, link it with that strategy and drive people forward and really put resource behind it. And that is both money and people.
Mm-hmm. And Melissa, you were talking about the fact that you go into schools, you might get pupils, really interested and invigorated about the space industry, but where's the pathway for them if they don't want to go to university, they can't afford, they don't want to take on the debt to go to university? How do you see apprenticeships?
Yeah, and that, when we started the outreach program down at Spaceport Cornwall, it was totally ad hoc. I didn't even go to school over here yet. I was leading it, and I was like, oh, okay. But, like Carissa said, you go into school, you're like, who here loves space? And everybody puts up their hand, gets all excited in primary school. Suddenly you go to secondary school, and you see less hands go up, especially girls. And then you also get the well, there's no role in it for me. So it's all great saying, oh, who here loves space, and you get some excitement. But unless you're like, okay, great, and here's your way into the industry. What are you interested in? What are you passionate about? And it's, breaking down those. You don't have to be an astrophysicist or an astronaut anymore. If you're into art, if you're into fashion, if you're into agriculture, there's lots of different paths. And then working with the colleges and universities, apprenticeships, other companies, we set up kind of that grassroots program and pathways, and worked with the ones around us that we know that because of restrictions on some of the ability to send young people away in Cornwall, you had a lot of people going into college, and you hear from Heidi, who was running the Truro College kind of Space Institute that started up out of our need to get that pathway in. So it's got to be that collaborative approach, but it's got to be planned out, and then it's got to be effectively communicated. And we're talking about that one kind of door into the industry. It also needs to be the same for young people. Where do they go to find that one source of what can I be when I grow up if I want to work in the space industry? That's fun and engaging and cool, and it's not just like, oh, go to this one or this one, and it's confusing. So I think it's got to be, the pathway's got to be there, but also we've got to communicate how to find them and be aware of them ourselves.
Okay, thank you. Another question is that, posing this is that the UK has used up our pool of skilled space enthusiasts, have we? I mean, the sector needs to be more attractive to a wider range of people. How would you approach this? Julia, can I bring you in and get your thoughts on perhaps how to stimulate that interest across a wider section of the population? Do you think we've used up our pool of skilled space enthusiasts?
No, absolutely not. I think that it's a bottomless pool to draw from, so to speak. But I think we could do a lot more in terms of mentorship. I think so often pastoral care and mentorship is seen as superfluous to a job or to a role, when actually it's critical. If we don't have representation, if we don't have ethnic minorities, for example, in leadership roles, then students might not see themselves in the position to career advancement or eventually take over that role themselves. To give a statistic on that, in 2020, only 1% of UK professors and only 3% of first-year PhD students in the UK were Black. Now, it takes about 3 to 4 years if you have the tenacity and strength to get through a PhD. So I think in 2024, it's important to evaluate that statistic and look at what change has been made and really what mentors do we have, who is in that position. Sass mentioned see it to be it. But it's true, if you don't see that career for yourself and developing the skills to get you there, or investing in something that is 3 to 4 years long or even longer, then it's going to be increasingly difficult. And we talked about barriers to entry, but it's very real.
Okay, Julia, thank you. Sass, do you have anything to add?
I was just going to add that I think and I know that this has been a government initiative for years as well, trying to get more people involved in STEM, which is obviously fundamental to a number of aspects to space, but I'm arts and humanities, and the practicalities of the physics around doing delta V calculations nearly blew my tiny little mind the first time I did it. But I knew that I wasn't going to be doing that all day, every day. And I think part of the trick in, as you say, like trying not to, have we emptied that pool? For a lot of people, I think there's still getting them to understand what space means to them. And that's not just from a military perspective or people that are already involved in the space industry. But I think as a general human being functioning on this planet nowadays, there is so much that is space enabled that is just, it's become such a norm that I don't think people think through where it comes from. And I went, a few years back, I went on a course, and there was a US general that came in to finish off the course. And we had the discussion about how to get more people to really understand what space was giving them, and therefore why it needed a focus of effort, because if we didn't have it, where would we be? And he literally said, we have two options open to us from the space military perspective right now in trying to get people to understand the domain better. He said, one is we get a really good Hollywood movie made out of it that is very realistic. He said, and the other is that we let the world know what 24 hours without space would look like across the world, and then get people to pay a bit more attention. And then it becomes, what's the bit about space that you can become passionate about? And for me, that has been talking to people about it. It really was, as I say, an eye-opener for me many years ago when I started. And that is part of the sort of the translation work that I do now, taking the very heavy technical speak that makes no sense to anybody other than another person that can do the technical speak, right the way through to somebody who's sitting there saying, why does defense need to siphon off some of the people, some of the money, etc., for space? And for me, that's part of it, is we create something for people to be passionate about in space.
Okay, thank you. Another really popular question that we're really coming to the end of this Q&A now, but I'd like to put to you in particular, Melissa, is what can everyday white male employees, i.e. not leaders, do to help, especially when we're not necessarily exposed to the problems or issues? Have you got any guidance about what allyship looks like? If you have, it would be much appreciated. Melissa.
I think it's pretty practical, and there's a few of you in the room that have done it for me for many, many years, and it's just listen, but actually listen, and believe in the person that you're listening to, and ask them, how can I help you? What can I do to help you out of this, or to get you into that position that you really want to get into? Like, we still need that help, and I've been lucky enough to have those champions. And I think when you do see, so that's one thing, is listen. And then the other thing is, call it out when you see behavior. I've been to many quite large conferences, the big exhibitions overseas, where the environment there can be quite interesting for people that maybe aren't a white male. And when the alcohol starts coming out, and I've seen and witnessed things, and I've had things happen to me in those occurrences, and I've had a lot of men around just watching things happen, or taking part in it, or not doing anything, or not stepping in when they should. And I think we've got to just stand up for each other. Like, this space is a small community, and I think if we want it to grow, we got to look after one another, and we also to obviously keep it safe. So those are a couple things. Call it out. I mean, it's not okay anymore, and I think you're going to start to hear from a lot of people are finding it not okay. So listen.
Thank you. Allyship, what would you say it looks like, Sass? What good examples have you had?
I think it's an ability to be open-minded to what somebody else is confronted with. Again, regardless of what that person might look like, the challenges that they face. So just having that ability to sit there and think, well, if that were me, how would I feel about it? What would I do about it? If that were my mother, sister, wife, whatever that they were talking to, would I tolerate it? But I think, again, just being open to those differences and encouraging them, and making sure that when you're sat in a room, has everybody spoken that wants to speak or feels that they have something to offer? And I think anything that you can do to make that a more natural process, because there's nothing worse than you might have something to say, but you're feeling a little bit nervous about it, to then be like, Sass, the woman in the room, please say something. Which is not the best way to go about it either. But it's just, you have to be able to facilitate conversations, I think.
Thank you. Julia, what's your best take on this?
Yeah, I think primarily, as you grow up, you don't get a sticker or a cookie for being a good person or for sticking up for others. This isn't something that's passive. If you want to build the world that you want to live in, then you have to be active about it. And so, like Melissa was saying, if you see something, say something. To quote the TFL, but this is the world that we live in, and I hope genuinely for those that are listening that there's a curiosity to make it better.
Thank you. And Carissa, your thoughts to end?
I think that we're all on the same team. So trying to, the situations I've been most comfortable in my career have been those where I was not othered because I'm a woman. And I've had, I think, quite good experiences throughout my career. To be in the room and be able to, contribute my expertise and be part of the conversation and make things move forward, fundamentally, that's what we're all here for. That's what we're all looking for. And I have had many, many, many experiences. The vast majority of my professional experiences have been along those lines. So I think that we would all like to, again, achieve our mission goals, see the best possible team doing that, which recruiting from and bringing in the best people from a broad array of candidates, and get on with the job. And creating an environment in which we can have a conversation about that, that's not adversarial, that's not blaming the people in the room for being in the room, trying to open the door to bring in other people is the path forward for me.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And it is all we have time for. Some of your questions will actually be quite suited to the next panel, so do repose them if I haven't got to them, because we'll be looking at how to develop and retain and attract the UK space workforce going forward in the next panel. But for now, let's give our panel here a really big round of applause. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much.